Hello, respected viewers. It's George from Ireland. So, this video is about the interface between politics and the judiciary, politics and law. Well, there was a prorogation of Parliament here in the United Kingdom. Oh my goodness! Just right at the end of August, when Parliament was due to come back in September, it was announced that Parliament would come back, but after just a few days, that session would be interrupted, and there'd be a long prorogation, the longest prorogation for I think a couple of centuries. And obviously the Prime Minister, under his royal prerogative, will persuade the Queen, well, in his official capacity, advise the monarch to agree to this, and the monarch always signs. And indeed she did. So Jacob Rees-Mogg, cabinet minister, he went up to Balmoral, which is in Scotland, and that's where the Queen spends July and August, and he asked her to sign, and she did. But anyway, so this has come before the courts because various parties have asked for judicial review. I say parties; I don't just mean individuals or groups, but political parties too have backed it. So the courts have to rule on this, and they're going to rule on Tuesday. That's tomorrow, whether it was legal or illegal. Was the Prime Minister within his powers to do so? And it's also the question of his intention, his motivation has come up, and that's germane to the decision as well. Why is he doing it? Now, the ostensible reason for Boris Johnson advising Her Britannic Majesty to prorogue Parliament is that it's been a very long parliamentary session, and then therefore they need quite a long recess in order to get ready for the new parliamentary session. So Parliament was closed down the middle of September. It's not going to meet till almost the end of October, and of course Brexit Day is the 31st of October, and unless something happens, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union on the 31st of October. At the moment, the UK doesn't have an agreement in place for the EU when that happens, so many people say the UK will leave its arse swinging in the breeze, as in exposed, in danger. So some people say this is judicial activism because the judges are being asked to rule on a question which is political in character. And some people are warning of the danger of critarchy, as in rule by judges. You may know the book of Judges in the Holy Bible. Judges rule the land, and some people think that was dreadful. So are they being asked to make decisions of a political nature? Now, the Scottish National Party, one of the groups which actually moved a lawsuit on this issue. Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland likewise moved a lawsuit. Now, as I heard initially, a judge in Scotland threw it out, said, really, there's no locus standi here. Likewise in Northern Ireland, well, it's really not in the purview of a court to decide this or not. But then another judge has taken it further, and obviously judges can disagree. They are individuals. Two judges, both equally learned, both fair-minded people, could have a different opinion on this one. And is it a judicial opinion they're having or a political opinion? It's difficult to decide. Judges are human too. They tend to be highly intelligent people, very, very well-read people. Obviously, they've got to pass law degrees, they've got to have successful legal careers and be appointed to the bench, and they take into account the person's standing as a legal scholar, as a successful practitioner, before appointing not just any old solicitor or barrister appointed to the bench. And therefore, these are the sort of people who are likely to have opinions, perhaps forthright opinions, that if you're canny and you quite fancy getting to wear the full bottom wig as a judge, you wouldn't be too voluble in voicing your political views. So Gina Miller, she's this British businesswoman, and she's been an outspoken anti-Brexiteer, has funded previous lawsuits. She has put one forward to the courts, and then it wasn't thrown out initially, and it's gone forward, and we're going to hear a ruling on it tomorrow. John Major, former Prime Minister, Conservative, he is backing up Gina Miller's case and saying, well, I'm not going to waste my time. I'll lend my name to your lawsuit. Now, of course, this is the height of hypocrisy for Mr. Major. Sorry, is he Lord Major? He's certainly Sir John Major. I don't think he's a peer. Because when he was Prime Minister, he secured a prorogation of Parliament right before the 1st of May 1997, about a couple of months before, because there was a highly embarrassing investigation into the cash for question scandal, corruption in the Tory party, and that was likely to come out, and then it would look very bad for the Conservative Party. And the Conservative Party, well, we were heavily defeated, but the defeat was going to be even worse if that came to light. Now, anyone who's done even sort of GCSE politics would know there are three branches of government: the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. So the legislature is the elected body, the elective bodies, the various ones. There's obviously Parliament at Westminster, the Welsh Assembly, the Northern Ireland Assembly, the Scottish Assembly, the London Assembly, and various county councils, city councils. But then there is the judiciary, which is the courts, and there are magistrates' courts and crown courts to deal with criminal matters. There are county courts and high courts to deal with civil matters. They all to come together in the Court of Appeal because they go up in tiers, and a higher tier can overrule the judgment of a lower tier, right up to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. You find they're building on Parliament Square, directly opposite Parliament, perhaps significantly. Because if they can't decide and there's some sort of dispute between, well, what are the powers of Westminster, what are the powers of the devolved assemblies, and eventually the Supreme Court has to rule on that. Certain issues can be referred to the European Court of Human Rights, which is not the European Court of Justice. The European Court of Justice, we're now encouraged to call it the Court of Justice of the European Union. Quite a mouthful, ECJ. But people so often get them confused and just say the European Court. Which one? European Court of Justice or the European Court of Human Rights? Anyway, I shan't go into that too much. That'd be digressing. So these three different branches of government, they've got different areas, and one shouldn't trespass into the area of the other. But the trouble is the frontier between them is ill-defined, as so often the case with any limitation of space or age or some sort of abstract borderline as we're talking about now. It makes me call to mind Lord Hewitt's dictum. He was a most celebrated jurist, and in 1924 he said, justice must not only be done, it must be manifestly and indubitably be seen to be done. So we must have a just decision, but also the appearance of it. It's possible for a just decision to be made, but it appears to be unjust, even though it isn't unjust. Do you follow? Supposing a judge is sitting in judgment on her brother, but her ruling is fair. But because it's her brother she's ruling on, people say she's partial towards him. On the other hand, if she gives a judgment in his favour, she gives a judgment against him, people say she was so worried about being accused of ruling in his favour that she's ruled against him, even though that's unfair. So you just can't win. So that's why you have to recuse yourself if it's someone you're involved with who's their relative by blood or marriage, someone who's an enemy of yours, someone you have any kind of business dealings with, any financial interest in the case. I'll say I must remove myself, things like that. So anyway, people think this notion of judicial neutrality came out of the Ark. It didn't. It's actually a relatively recent innovation, a very welcome one though. You would have to look far back in history to say the third Marquess of Salisbury, Conservative Prime Minister, and he was saying that he liked to appoint Tory judges since he was a Tory and he felt they gave much better judgments than Liberals. There were no Labour Party members who were on the bench in those days. The Labour Party was in its infancy, and as Salisbury said, that socialism is a creed beyond the pale of human tolerance, and much of the patrician class to which he belonged would have been of one accord with him when he expressed that view. Or take, say, Charles Evans Hughes. In the United States, he was the Republican Party's candidate in the 1916 presidential election. He was defeated, but he was nevertheless appointed to the Supreme Court. And there were quite a few Supreme Court justices in the United States who had been frontline politicians. And these days, that would be regarded as completely inapposite. Certainly in Ireland or Great Britain, we would have no truck with that because they can't be someone who'd been down and dirty in politics fighting about contentious issues. Because remember, you said this or you didn't say that, or you were less than honest on whatever issue. And in politics, let's face it, it's impossible to get through it being completely honest, telling the truth. At the very least, you've got to keep silent on things, even if you notice when your side has said something foolish, has been selective, and what they said, economical with the actualité, those famous words relating to the Spycatcher case. or Northern Ireland, obviously the judges in the old days appointed by the government of Northern Ireland, a unionist government. They almost overwhelmingly appointed unionist judges and or Protestant judges. Some of them were members of the Orange Order, which is a controversial Protestant-only organisation, and people called into question the impartiality of the judiciary. So the judiciary should be apolitical. We don't want show trials. We don't want politicised justice. You know, I'm a Liberal Democrat. You're a UKIPper. I'm finding you guilty despite the evidence not being so strong in the Magistrates' Court. Or similarly, I'm a Conservative. You're an SNP person and you've been found guilty. It wasn't up to me, it was up to the jury. But I'm going to punish you more heavily, not because you're a burglar, because you're an SNP burglar, or blah, blah, blah. You know, or she's a member of the Green Party and I'm a member of the Labour Party, and therefore she's going to rule against me in some sort of civil suit, and on and on. So we can't have that. Now, her ruling might be fair, but because of the political party angle, people might say it was unfair, even if it wasn't. So judges are not prevented from being members of political parties, but so far as I know, they're none. I've never heard of any. I have asked a judge this. Likewise, civil servants of the United Kingdom. I remember Lord Butler of Brockwell, who was the master of my college, and I asked them, are they permitted to be members of political parties? He said, they are. However, they mustn't be active. How active? Going to meeting once or what? Or campaigning every single day? I don't know what the line is. So clearly there is some sort of blurred boundary between politics and the law. And courts must rule on what politicians do. There's the executive. I didn't talk about that branch sufficiently. Those who have executive power to say execute, like do it. Execute doesn't necessarily mean punish, as in kill someone because of a judicial ruling. Can just mean to do it, to carry it out, execute the orders. I remember that film, Tora Tora Tora, in the US Navy, they're saying execute the orders. Or I used to have a calculator, and the equals button said execute, meaning do the calculation. Like, so executives, even in businesses, they have the authority to give orders. So the executive command people to do this and that. The Prime Minister, the Cabinet, that's the group at the top, say 25 ministers, as in Chancellor of the Exchequer, that'd be Finance Minister in most countries, the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary, the Foreign Minister in most countries it's called, the Home Secretary, in many countries it's called the Interior Minister, the Education Secretary, the Health Secretary, the Transport Secretary, and so forth, all in charge of different areas of government activity. But beneath each Secretary of State, as in the Secretary of State for Transport, Secretary of State for Health, Secretary of State for Education, any of these are a Secretary of State. The Chancellor of Exchequer, he or she is a Secretary of State. The Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Offices, that person is a Secretary of State. They all have several Ministers of State, usually about 3 beneath them, for different areas within that. So within education, there'll be one in charge of universities, the Minister of State for universities, the Minister of State for secondary schools, the Minister of State for primary schools, or however they choose to divide it up. Like, you know, in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, they've got a Minister of State for Europe, a Minister of State for Africa, a Minister of State for Asia, and so forth. And they keep changing the departments and the boundaries between them. That's rather complex. So secretary in this case does not mean the person who's answering the phone and the emails. It's not. It's just means a cabinet minister. So there we are. So minister is the Latin word is for servant, as in they're serving the public and the Queen. I know we have religious leaders called ministers, ministers of God. But anyway, so they have the power to command people to do this or that. The prime minister is obviously commanding the armed forces on behalf of the monarch and so forth. So because some decisions need to be taken quickly, and we don't need too much debate about that and consensus, and sometimes even a minority decision can be forced through. Should we have an executive at all? All right, that's something we could dispute, but we do. And the judiciary have to decide whether the person's acted ultra vires, that's to say, beyond the power of the man. So let's say the Prime Minister of the UK can't pick the Portuguese football team or something because he doesn't pick football teams at all and he doesn't pick them for another country. So they might have gone beyond what they're permitted to do. So that's how it's so complicated. Now, the judges usually are loath to intrude on the political arena. They want to stay out of the political forum and leave that out to politicians to battle it out. Just like politicians ought to stay out of the judicial forum, like David Blunkett when he was Home Secretary. And this is up until about 2005. He was really disgraceful. Or people would be arrested, like after the 7/7 bombings. I think he said, "Oh, they're really dangerous and they're terrible," and completely prejudicing their trial. I mean, if they were found guilty, but I don't know how they didn't launch an appeal on that basis. Or even if people were arrested pursuant to some warrant, and he would give a quotation to the newspapers, completely undermining the presumption of innocence. Or if he didn't get the ruling he wanted out of the courts, he would lambast the judiciary, give them actually a tongue lashing in public. Again, that was outrageous, showing such frank disrespect for the judiciary. You might find it deeply frustrating, but it's vital that we have an independent judiciary as a check on the executive and the legislature, because the executive, they do things I agree, I disagree, and I have a political leaning towards one party. But I mean, my party could be wrong, they're flawed, and sometimes the judiciary are wrong, but there needs to be a constraint on what the executive and the legislature can do, and indeed what the judiciary can do. There's certain things they can't do as well. So the judiciary, in relation to the prorogation of Parliament, are asking, right, so you're giving Parliament a very long recess. Why? If it's because they need one because of a very long session, that might be permissible, lawful, probably is. But if you're doing it simply because you want to frustrate Parliament so they won't be able to debate Brexit and possibly stop it, that might be illegitimate, that might rule against it. It could still be legitimate, I'm not sure. I'm minded to say that it is permissible, doing it simply to prevent Brexit being blocked, and I think that's why Boris Johnson's doing it, though he's lying about it. I could be wrong, but I very much doubt that I'm wrong when I think he's telling porcupines about his true motivation. But anyway, they will decide. And one thing is, the judge could rule, well, we think he is lying, or the Supreme Court rather. That's up to 12 of them. We think he is lying, and his we're not sure, so we have to let him do it. Or we think he's lying, but it doesn't really matter what his intention is. He's allowed to do it anyway. Or we think he's lying, and it does matter, and therefore he's not allowed to do it. And Parliament has to come back. Is he going to disobey the Supreme Court? Well, he said that he won't, but we shall see. What happens if he does? Is someone going to be arrested for going against the Supreme Court? A politician? Hasn't happened so far as that I know. Because is he breaking the criminal law? And this is what's so tricky about the British Constitution. What is the British Constitution? There is no codified constitution, like a single document. Obviously, the people say Magna Carta is part of it. They say Erskine May is part of it. This book written in the 19th century about parliamentary procedure. Who said that's part of it? It's all very vaguely emerged. Now, there are certain acts, like, say, the Fixed Term Parliaments Acts, or the many iterations of the Representation of the People Act, which are part of it. And what is a constitution, incidentally? It's the laws touching government, saying what are the powers of the government, how does it work, which institutions have which lawful powers, and so forth, and what fundamental rights do people have. So remember the old Latin tag, fiat justitia ruat caelum, let justice be done, though the sky should fall. So no matter what the consequences, you must make the right decision as a judge. Supposing the government had information that a terrorist organization wanted to send off a nuclear bomb, killing tens of millions of people, and the government said, well, let's actually just torture people in order to get information about that, so we can stop the nuclear bomb and save tens of millions of lives. But the judge says, well, I've heard all that, but even so, no, torture is not allowed under any circumstances, no matter how exigent, even though that risks the bomb going off and tens of millions of people dying. So the bomb does go off and tens of millions of people die, but justice was done. That Latin motto is the motto for the office I work in, the court system of the state of Tennessee. Ah, there you are. You probably knew the translation of it already. Fiat, as in let it be done, like fiat lux, let it be light, let there be light in the book of Genesis. Like Fiat cars, those Italian ones. But in that case, it's sort of a play on words. It's an acronym of Fabbrica Italiana Automobilistica Torinese, as in Italian automobile factory of Turin. But fiat has come to mean by whim, by this royal edict, just ruling by decree. So there are political decisions and there are judicial ones, and the border between them is unclear, as I pointed out. So traditionally used to say that Parliament makes laws and judges interpret it. Can judges make laws? It's a matter which is hotly disputed amongst jurists. And how do they interpret it? There's a lot of debate about statutory interpretation, the golden rule, the mischief rule, and so on. One of them is well, what was the purpose of the legislation? The legislation will often say, an act to do this or this, right? This is our goal in doing it. There might be something might be unclear, but often British legislation will say, for the avoidance of doubt, blah blah blah. Say here is a list. It's illustrative, it's not exhaustive. We're showing you examples of what we're trying to do, but we may not say everything we're trying to do. We might be some we didn't remember to mention. So should they fill in the blanks or not? Again, that's hotly disputed amongst the judiciary. And the other one is say the purpose of the law was to say prevent drug trafficking. All right, that's the mischief rule. That's the mischief it's trying to tackle. So if we have to interpret it, we bear that in mind. That's the purpose, and we try and interpret in a way which deals with that mistress. We mustn't go too far. We mustn't be too creative. Well, there's also the officious bystander rule, saying if supposing when they were negotiating a contract, an officious bystander, as in a sort of interfering person who was overhearing, earwigging, said, "But don't you mean whatever, whatever?" And the one of the parties would testily suppress him with the words, "Oh, of course." Well, then you must, as the officious bystander, just read that into the contract. That's to do with civil law, as in non-criminal law. I remember this fascinating case relating to the Offences Against the Person Act, 1861, where the Offences Against the Person Act, person meaning body in this case, not individual, said that you can't stab people or kick them or punch them or blah, blah, blah. And there was a criminal matter where one man had bitten off another man's nose, and it came before a court of law. And it was pointed out by the defence that the Offences Against the Person Act did not prohibit biting off somebody's proboscis or any other part of the person. And the court said, well, shall we convict this person anyway or not? It's not stabbing, it's not kicking, it's not punching or whatever, it's not twisting their arm, it's not hitting them with a blunt bludgeon or whatever, and saying, well, Parliament didn't forbid this, so we're not going to make that up. If this is a problem, that's up to Parliament to clear up, not for us to intervene, and not us to invent laws. We can't dream up laws we might like to exist. So we acquit the person because he's not guilty, he hasn't broken any law. So there we are. And I know that under, let's say, equity, judges are sometimes a little bit creative. If you go back to the Middle Ages, the statute law was too rigid and too contradictory, and people didn't know what the law was. So judges said, well, we just have to deal with this. Or they often said, we will not suffer a wrong to be without a remedy. If there's something unjust has been done, there must be a way that the courts can sort this out. So we'll be a little bit inventive. And so there's, again, a very blurred frontier between law and equity, especially in relation to property cases. So yeah, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary must be keen not to intrude into each other's spheres. If an act can be unconstitutional but not illegal, as Boris actions has been described, doesn't that mean there's no real constitution as understood in the rest of the world? Well, I suppose as a point as uncodified, the United Kingdom's constitution, some people say unwritten. Professor Vernon Bogdanor at Oxford University, I recall him saying that when he was a schoolboy, there's a subject called British Constitution, which he chose not to study because he said, there is no British Constitution. We now call it politics and government. So it's a very debatable what the British Constitution is. The UK Constitution is said to be very flexible, but the trouble is very nebulous, possible to manipulate, possible to break, when we're not even clear what it is. I mean, I didn't want there to be a European Constitution. Obviously, it's now in the guise of the Treaty of Lisbon. But anyway, it is at least good that the EU knows what the laws are. What are the roles of the different institutions, and what are they permitted to do, and what are they prohibited for doing, and so on. Trying to define some sort of boundary between them and state what the fundamental rights are. Republic of Ireland, we've got a codified constitution. I happen to agree with most of it. I could disagree with all of it, but still be glad that it exists. So we've got some sort of idea what's going on. And, this idea that there's the dignified crown, not the personal crown in relation to the monarch of the United Kingdom. And so that's worked fairly well over the past few centuries. And like Edward VIII, he supposedly couldn't speak to the people, broadcast to the people before he abdicated. That'd be unconstitutional. Says who? There's no actual legislation to say that. And it was pointed out in Queen Victoria's reign that every army officer and soldier and Royal Naval officer and sailor, they're all by her command. In theory, she could dissolve the British Army or sack everybody in the Royal Navy, that kind of thing, or sack every single judge. It's all in her name. Now, so far we've had fairly sensible monarchs. What if a complete lunatic or malevolent person comes along and does that? Are we going to go along with that or not? Oh, it won't happen. Don't be sure it won't happen. It could happen. Look at someone like Trump. I know they found ways around it, like, say, the Regency Act under George III, one who was afflicted by mental illness. So this is just how shadowy, or should I say, how obscure the whole situation is. If you were Prime Minister, what would be your first amendment in the newly created UK Constitution, or would you want a constitution? Well, first of all, I'd leave the EU. The constitution, apart from that, a good question. Well, I wish I could reverse devolution, but I think that's unlikely. It's unworkable. It's quite popular in the various parts of the UK. The changes are like, okay, the voting system. That alternative vote referendum in 2011, I was against it, and I would have voted no. I didn't vote, actually, because I was abroad. I know I was allowed to vote, but I chose not to. I think one shouldn't vote when abroad. I would bring that in, because we should have a parliament which is representative of the true gamut of public opinion. So there's much more of a breadth of a public opinion than parliament would lead you to believe. You look back, say, as recently as the 60s, the Conservative Party and Labour, between them, got 95% of the vote. By the 2010s, they were getting about 75% of the vote. It's gone up a bit again, just because the Lib Dems were in the doldrums. But UKIP should have MPs. The Green Party should have MPs. People say, what about extremists, the BNP? Now, I loathe the BNP, but they certainly were a significant section of opinion, and therefore that should be represented. You think it's vile? That's democracy. That's what people are. That's what some people want. They could perhaps be exposed how bad they are. Or who is it, the Socialist Alliance, or the Respect Party, like Republic of Ireland. We have a better electoral system, which truly reflects the breadth of public opinion, and we let 1,000 schools of thought contend, and we still have stable government. So I suppose that would probably be the main one I would like to bring in, because otherwise it was just a duopoly, and if you weren't one of the major parties, you could more or less forget about getting elected. I mean, until the 90s was like this. Go back to the 60s, say 650 seats in Parliament. The Liberals had 6 of them at one stage. That meant if you stood as a Liberal, there was a 99% chance that you would lose. All right, the Liberals didn't stand in quite a few constituencies, but that was preposterous to bring such a large country. The United States is even worse. 320 million people, and every single person in the Senate and the House of Representatives for decades has been either a Republican or a Democrat, with I think only 2 exceptions in the last 40 years. And there we are. And for such a gigantic country, such an extraordinary mixed country, that is beyond preposterous. So anyway, politicians should try and win in the court of public opinion and not in the courts as such. What if the court made a ruling that went against 99% of the public opinion? Would that be wrong? Probably. What if they went against 100% of the public opinion? One judge decides against everyone else's will. That'd be bad. Your views against devolution. Don't you think a federal system has been created would still be a United Kingdom of all the Isles? I personally prefer a unitary state of Ireland and Great Britain, but I realise that's fairly unpopular. And so it might be a case of reform that you may preserve, or good fences make good neighbours, or by having devolution all round, that gives us a better chance at some semblance of unity, rather than trying to force a unitary state. And obviously the Irish Home Rule issue was a major one from the 1880s. Hello, Brett Garside. And it was discussed in the 1890s, should there be Home Rule all round within the United Kingdom, Home Rule for Ireland and Scotland and Wales and England, I suppose, too. I remember meeting Koenig Meadowcroft 20 years ago from the Movement for the English Parliament, and he wanted that. Not the breakup of the UK, but an English Parliament, and not in Westminster, a separate building, to prove to the separatists in Northern Ireland, in Wales and Scotland, that Westminster is for the United Kingdom and not for England. There's the West Lothian question has never been answered. Tam Dayel, I met him once, his veteran Labour MP, old Etonian, real maverick, but he said he represented West Lothian, that constituency. So he was said, why is it under the devolution scheme an MP for an English constituency cannot vote on an internal Scots matter, but an MP for a Scots constituency could vote on an internal English matter. And nobody answered that one. It's illogical, and it's still there. Hello, Peter. Well, I'm about half an hour in. So English votes are English laws. In 2005, the Conservative Party went into the election campaigning for that. If a law is only about England, then only MPs representing England will be permitted to vote on that. And it's never been sorted out. And of course, after 2005, Labour had a narrow majority, and the only reason they had it is because they had enough MPs in Scotland. The Conservatives had a tiny majority of MPs in England. And obviously Labour had quite a few MPs in Wales. The Conservatives had rather few. So that's that. It wasn't a hypothetical matter. It actually come true. They could have English votes or English laws. Not to say that an MP is English in any sense, born in England or ethnically English, whatever that is, but to represent a constituency in that area. Because remember, you could be from Scotland, represent a constituency in England. You could be an MP you could be from England but represent somewhere in Northern Ireland, or be from Scotland and represent somewhere in Wales, or whatever it is. You could be from Jamaica, represent a seat in Scotland. You could be from Singapore, represent a seat in England, because Commonwealth citizens have the right to stand for election and indeed vote in the United Kingdom if they're resident, or people from the Republic of Ireland, we're allowed to stand for election in the UK and indeed vote in the UK if we're resident, and on and on. So there we are, some of my views about how we have to sort it out, how the MP, how they might resile from getting involved, these judges, because they view it as a political matter which has got to be sorted out. You know, they tend to rule in favour of the government because the government usually acts legally. About 80% of the time they do. But touching on my previous video, remember the Socialist Workers' Party about 20 years ago saying that the judiciary in the United Kingdom is overwhelmingly drawn from the same demographic that comprises the Conservative Parliamentary Party, as in Pale, Male and Stale, as in whites from upper middle class families in the home counties who've been to public school, who've been to varsity, who are straight and all the rest of it. Gosh, tiny NZ2, New Zealand. Anyone from any Commonwealth country can do that. Jacinda Ardern was an aide for Tony Blair. Might put you off. Seems like an overgrown student union representative to me. Anyway, got Boris Johnson in charge now, and I always think, well, you know, the court jester should not end up as king, but he has. So that's that. Well, we might be heading for another recession. I hope there's no bank bailout as there was 11 years ago under Labour. You know, all this public money going to these banks, these multi-billion-pound banks. I believe I'm English who lives near Halifax 1st Battalion, the Duke of Wellington's regiment, England veteran, suffering common law, constitutional, something about 1972. Sorry, I didn't read to the end of your rather extensive comment. I was going to say, bailing out the banks, well, it's like this. It was really something in Churchillian tones, should have been delivered by Gordon Brown. Never in the field of human conflict have so few owed so much to so many. And has it been paid out back by the banks? All the public money they were given to keep them solvent? Is that legal? So judges very seldom rule against the government. As I say, the government usually acts within its powers, does things which are lawful. How can something be unconstitutional but not unlawful? I mean, the Constitution is all about law, what law is, how law is made, and things like that. So it doesn't seem to make sense to me. I think clarifying what the UK Constitution actually is would be a good thing. That was beautiful. Many thanks, Diane. And how do we know Magna Carta is even part of it? Because obviously, well, that was an edict again, not an act of Parliament. And what else about it? And then the people say it was signed under duress and all the rest of it. So it's just very unclear, and I would like a little bit of clarity on this, so we spell out what's what. All right, I'm going to sign off now. So I rely on donations to maintain this channel. So please show immense liberality. Donate to me on Patreon, or better still on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. You'll find me with that. You want a letter from London, do you, Peter? So this is my email address, and it's all small letters. Golf Echo, Oscar Romeo, Golf Echo, Charlie Alpha, Lima Lima Alpha, Golf Hotel, Alpha, November 79 @gmail.com. Okay, good night.